My son, he was rushed to the hospital, unconscious after an accident. My mother-in-law was crying very genuinely and went on appealing to me about how desperate the situation was. However, instead of being surprised and crestfallen because of this news, my heart remained undeterred as I stared at my mother-in-law, honestly not caring very much about the whole thing. I see. Mrs. Michaels, I know this will seem truly unexpected and perhaps cruel, but I must ask you to go home. She stared at me intently, then turned red in the face and lashed out in anger. I don't blame her. Who in the right state of mind would turn away a woman worried sick about her son, whose life could be in danger because of an accident? It was a natural reaction considering how she felt, but rest assured, I had very good reason for not feeling concerned. This is the story of how my husband was quite untrustworthy even before we were married in the first place, and how an accident kick-started a series of events that eventually allowed me to divorce him. My name is Jacqueline Michaels, and I'm a 28-year-old housewife. My husband, Garrett, who is 2 years older than me, had succeeded his father in running a small, locally successful business. However, his mother, Miss Diane Michaels, still manages the company as the head chairman of the board, so consider my husband still in training to run the entire enterprise. He is still 30 years old, and frankly, too young and inexperienced to be able to run a business. The good news is that he knew that, and every day he did his best to learn the ins and outs of business, and how one could be maintained for a long period of time. While Gareth might seem like a hardworking, loyal gentleman by that description, in reality, I regret to admit he's exactly the opposite, at least when it comes to loyalty. Since the very same year I married him, I have been troubled by his repeated problems with other women. Ever since we were newlyweds, Gareth has had the silhouettes of multiple other women on his mind. He even goes on little nights out together with these women, and that alone would spark suspicion in any woman's heart. I was no exception, and taking precautionary measures to potentially catch him red-handed in the act of adultery had essentially become a sort of pastime for me. I installed a high-quality camera in the car. I went through the search history on the home desktop to see if he made any reservations for restaurants. I even installed a mechanism where I could track his phone with my own whenever he came home late. Call me a jealous bitch. Go on, do it. It's just true. While the camera in the car could be provided with an alibi, the other things I did were the equivalent of paranoia, and couldn't be more justified with the evidence I managed to gather. It seemed that he only went out for dinner or for a drive with these other women, and that was as far as they went. Not to mention the fact that sometimes he was with a group of people, men and women present. More often, though, I was certain that he had been alone with other women, and I had not been able to get any proof that it had gone anywhere beyond simple socializing. I wondered if he is trying to avoid leaving any evidence, or if he is really just enjoying a fun, innocent night out with a woman. In my personal opinion, being alone with a woman is enough to be cheating on me. But in legal terms, it's not enough to be considered adultery, where you can enforce the law to obtain alimony if needed. I had not been able to find any solid evidence of his infidelity, but the jealousy and pressure was becoming great, and I feared I would eventually buckle under and break down. That's why I once asked for a divorce, because I couldn't stand the fact that he was going out with women so often. Gareth, listen, if you're so intent on going out alone with other women, why don't you just go back to being single?
Oh, come on now, honey. Let's not jump to conclusions. I'm telling you, it's just stuff for work. I promise. I honestly didn't think you were this narrow-minded.
Are you saying I'm done?
Because you are, aren't you? Entertaining clients is part of the job, and if I don't do that, well, the business could falter. Just because the person in charge of the business partnership is a woman doesn't mean I always develop a horny demeanor. Well, you've only worked in the company for about 5 years, so maybe you wouldn't understand.
Gareth said as he smiled cheerfully. I I was good at reading between the lines, and he was giving off a very strong, I'm giving you the status as the wife of the president of the company, even though you have little experience in that society. And that's why I want you to laugh and forgive me for cheating on you vibe. And that's why I became determined than ever to get proof and slap him with the karma of how lightly he was treating our marriage 3.5 years. In my subsequent research, I found a couple of things that I thought were pretty important. First, I found out that even if someone suspected their partner of cheating, the accumulated evidence was often not accepted as evidence of infidelity. And second, it is against the law to tamper with your partner's phone and search it, as it is a violation of privacy should the evidence be nowhere. In other words, I had to be patient and find better ways to obtain solid evidence of infidelity. One day, while I was wondering if there was anything I could do, Gareth, perhaps caught off guard by the assurance that I had not been able to find any evidence exposing him up until then, finally started to give himself away.
I'm going on a business trip to Tokyo for 3 days starting Friday. So, could you please take out my suitcase?
Okay, sure. Should I prepare an overnight set and put it in as usual?
No, I'll prepare it myself this time, since I have some classified materials from an external source. Business can be shady sometimes.
Then, is it okay if I book you the hotel you always use in Austin?
I'll arrange that too, this time, so you don't have to worry about that.
I felt a slight sense of discomfort, even though he had always made me prepare everything for his business trips, even after we were married. Now he was volunteering to do everything himself. The perpetual feeling of something wrong going on became more apparent, and I went and checked the home desktop to search for any information. Sure enough, as usual, the search history had been erased, but there was one thing that caught my eye. The history for yesterday had been erased, but there was a booking website that he'd go on at 11:58 p.m. the day before. He failed to notice and erase these, and sure enough, I found a reservation for a stay at a B&B. However, the destination was not Austin, but a famous sightseeing spot in the opposite direction, and the reservation was for 2 adults. I couldn't say for sure, but this was probably the biggest lead I would ever get, considering he lied about where he was going. Finally, I had a clue. I hired a private detective to follow Gareth on his trip. I wanted to be sure I had solid evidence, and the best way to do that would be to hire a professional. I wanted him to keep me constantly updated, providing me with even the smallest of details regarding not only Garrett's interaction with the woman, but things like whether he stayed in the same room as her, or if he was touching in any way. The negotiations went smoothly, and I was confident the detective would do a good job. Then came the day Gareth was to leave for a so-called business trip. The detective was to follow the husband from the time he left home, and I saw him follow Garrett's car in an ordinary gray Honda CR-V. That same evening, the detective called me on time to report that my husband had stayed in the same room with a young, attractive woman, and that he had taken pictures of him hugging her in the car and at tourist attractions. It was something I had imagined, but it still came as a bit of a shock. I thought I wouldn't, to be honest. I thought I would be relieved that I was right all along, but I guess I still had some feelings for my husband. I spent that night staring at the ceiling until dawn, unable to sleep. The next evening, I received a call from the detective. A little early for a regular call. Did something happen? I felt an unpleasant easiness in my gut. Lo and behold, this premonition was justified. I was told that Gareth and the woman had been in an accident while on vacation and had been rushed to the emergency room because they were both unconscious. Ironically, the detective I had hired was the one who had to call the ambulance. The detective had become a key eyewitness to the accident, which were valuable for police investigations into the accident. They were indeed now being questioned by the police and could no longer fulfill my request to tail them.
I can arrange for a substitute. A colleague of mine could continue tailing Mr. Michaels, should you request it, ma'am.
Oh no, you've done more than enough. No more tailing will be necessary. I'd like to change my request to a background check on the woman, if that's possible.
Very good, ma'am.
Thank you. Just as I hang up the phone, it rings again. This time, it's from a hospital, presumably the one he was taken to after the accident. Is this the number of a family member of one Mr. Gareth Michaels? I regret to inform you that my husband was in an accident, wasn't he? Excuse me? Oh, yes, ma'am, he was. Did you hear from the police? Yes, something like that. I was quite frankly not upset because I had received the news accident from the detective. The hospital must have undoubtedly thought my overly calm reaction was strange. I understand it's a long way from where you live, ma'am, but please come to the hospital as soon as possible. It's certainly a long way. They must have gotten even more suspicious with that carefree reply of mine. They bid me good with a confused tone before hanging up on the phone. My head was a bit fuzzy from lack of sleep. Go to a hospital nearly halfway across the state as soon as possible with a physically and mentally exhausted self? Yeah, I honestly didn't see that happening. I was still his wife, so I would have to do the procedures and sign the consent form for the surgery. But I couldn't bring myself to rush to the person who had betrayed me. While I was thinking about what to do, the intercom rang at my front door. I checked the camera and saw my mother-in-law, Mrs. Michaels, standing there. Mrs. Michaels? Jacqueline, honey, you're here. Can you come out to the front door? Of course, ma'am. I opened the door. No sooner had she come inside than she started crying and appealing to me about how desperate the situation was. Jacqueline, dear, is it true that Gareth was in an accident and is unconscious? The hospital called you and they said you were acting kind of strange, so the hospital called me too. Oh, so that's what happened. Honey, are you doing okay? I know the sudden news may have shocked you, but you have to hold on tight for right now. I'm fine, ma'am. Good. Come with me to the hospital. Are you all packed? Frankly speaking, I had had enough. I was far too tired to deal with the situation, and in that moment, the last thing I wanted to do was to travel far and wide to get to the man who stabbed me in the back. I said to Mrs. Michaels, who was wiping her tears, Mrs. Michaels, I know this will seem truly unexpected and perhaps cruel, but I must ask you to go home. Huh? I'm not going to the hospital. What are you talking about? Please don't say crazy things, not at this dire hour. My mother-in-law shook my shoulders angrily. Her son was taken to the hospital, unconscious, and her daughter-in-law honestly didn't seem to care very much about the whole thing. So, it's no wonder she was angry. I have my reasons, Mrs. Michaels. Yesterday, Gareth told me he was going to Austin on a business trip. A business trip in Austin? But that boy was in an accident in Oklahoma City. Indeed. It's a completely different city. And I believe you, of all people, Mrs. Michaels, would know that he wasn't supposed to be on a business trip at all. I suppose so. And additionally, do you know he was with a woman at the time of the accident? That woman is his lover, ma'am. I'm almost certain of that, based on the investigation by the detective I hired. The identity of the woman is still under investigation, it seems, but I'm sure we'll find out soon. My son? Having an affair? My mother-in-law was trembling as she listened. I wonder what she thought of my story. To me, my husband is nothing but a traitor. But in the eyes of Mrs. Michaels, the mother of the perpetrator, no matter how old and naughty he got, he was always going to be her little boy. I waited for her to open her mouth, thinking that she would probably defend him. But the next moment, she got on her knees in front of me and bowed deeply in apology. Miss Jacqueline, I'm sorry about everything. My son has been giving you such a hard time, and I failed to notice anything. Oh, Mrs. Michaels, please, don't do this. You did nothing wrong. No, I'm sure me getting down on my knees is far from enough to even begin to make amends. I am truly sorry for what that stupid son of mine has done to you, Jacqueline. I don't think I can ever forgive myself for raising him to be such a traitor. It's all my fault. Mrs. Michaels, please, no one could have asked for a better mother, I assure you. You're more a mother to me than anything else, I assure you. Please, please, please raise your head. I was so surprised and felt so guilty for making her think she was at fault that I literally begged her to raise her head, but she refused to oblige and kept her head down against the ground. Jacqueline, will you let me be in charge of the situation? I promise I won't make things worse. Excuse me? It would mean the world to me. If you can find it in your heart to leave everything to me, I promise you will not regret it. Oh, okay. Of course. I'll leave everything to you, Mrs. Michaels. Thank you so much. With that, Mrs. Michaels bowed her head deeply once again and got into the cab that she'd come in. About 3 hours later, I received a call from her. Gareth regained consciousness just a couple of minutes ago. They're going to run some tests on him, just to be sure he doesn't have any serious injuries. I'll take him home the day after tomorrow. Yes, ma'am. I understand. When can we expect the report from the detective? I just checked with him, and he said it should be ready in about 5 days. I see. I'll be too early. In that case, you can rest assured that I will keep my promise not to make things worse. You will not regret this, honey. Trust me. After reassuring me, she hung up the phone. 2 days later, she informed me that she had brought Gareth home. The report from the detective was postponed a few days in the first place because of the changes and additions to my initial request of tailing Gareth. I was worried that he might try to get away with it again, but Mrs. Michaels suggested that we wait until the report was completed before we discuss the matter. Until then, Jacqueline, you ought to get some proper rest. From here on, it's a matter of energy and stamina after all. Mrs. Michaels? Why? Why what, dear? Why are you helping me? You mean, why am I on your side? The reason is simple. I hate crooked people. I really don't think I can say more because that's pretty much it. But Gareth is your son. How could a mother such as yourself ever purposefully place yourself in a situation where you could potentially lose him for the sake of another person who isn't even related to you by blood? He's my child, and that's precisely why there are things for which I can't forgive him. A parent's job isn't just to protect their children. We also have the responsibility of correcting ill behavior in the most effective way possible. I just intend to do my job well, dear, rest assured. Her kind but strong words helped me believe her more completely. A week after the accident, I received the report from the detective agency. Mrs. Michaels suggested that we hold the meeting in the main conference room of the company. Mrs. Michaels herself and the company's board of directors were seated in the section of the room closer from the door. Furthest from the door sat my husband's large body, contorted in embarrassment. Next to him, the woman in the photograph taken by the detective was sitting, staring at the middle of the table, her face deadly pale. She was a beautiful woman, though her face was scarred because of the accident. I'm hoping they consider themselves lucky they were unconscious from the accident, because otherwise I would have socked them both into the shadow realm anyhow, I thought to myself nonchalantly. Jacqueline, please sit over here, next to me. I sat down in the chair to the left of Mrs. Michaels, as per her request. There was another man sitting there, a stranger. He was a tall, thin man with brown hair and the greenest eyes I'd ever seen in my life. His expression was one of regret and disappointment, but underneath that revealed a man of dignity and virtue. This is Jonah. That woman over there is Taylor, his wife. That was exactly the same as the name of the woman I had asked the detective to investigate. Taylor Brooklyn. Right then, I remembered from the report that she was also married too, so I turned to Mr. Brooklyn and said, I am Garrett's wife, sir. I am terribly sorry about everything.
Oh, no, ma'am, please. The blame is all on me.
From here onward, this discussion will be recorded. Gareth, tell the truth and nothing but the truth in your own words. My husband looked frightened and began to tremble as his own mother started to covertly blackmail him.
Well, where do you want me to start?
How about the beginning? Tell us everything, down to the most minute of details.
Yes.
He sometimes lost his words, but he told everyone present about his relationship with Taylor. He'd met her when he was a student in university and started dating her then. They broke up once, but met again at a class reunion, and his feelings for her ignited once again. But much to his dismay, Taylor was already married to Jonah, and Gareth decided to marry me just to make her jealous. And just as my husband had hoped would happen, Taylor really did become jealous, and things got exciting between the two of them. I suppose my existence was the gasoline that kept the spicy fire that was their forbidden love for each other burning bright. It was truly the most ridiculous story I'd ever heard. I tried so hard not to laugh at the specific details. It was so stupid. I came to the realization that my husband must have been meeting various women simply to cover up his relationship with Taylor and to make her even more jealous. He thought it was okay to go on a trip for a few days because he was perhaps amused that I, a stupid fool who had always was his second choice, was struggling to find evidence of any adultery. But thanks to the two of them getting a little too cocky, I now had solid evidence proving they were having a legitimate affair. And if there really is a divine punishment, I think that would have been the accident that happened on their trip, because that singular event brought everything to light. When my husband finished speaking, his mother raised her voice in disgust. "You really took after your father in all the wrong ways." She glared at her son and his adulterous lover, and they both shrugged their shoulders. "So you admit to the affair, do you?"
Yes.
"Very good. The board of directors will discuss your penalty at the company and will notify you shortly."
Wait, what? Mom, listen to me. If Jacqueline forgives me for cheating on her, there's no problem, right? I mean, you know it was all a joke, right?
So, you're telling me that what you just told everyone wasn't the truth?
Well, no, it was.
Then your feelings for Taylor are as real can get. What in the name of King Arthur makes you think I'll forgive you for this? And I believe you're forgetting about Jonah. Doesn't he deserve a say in how things are going to proceed?
Well, I have no intention of forgiving you either.
I'd like to tell you that each couple ought to discuss this matter individually. Now, but as the mother of a traitor, I'd like to speak to you now.
Mom, I mean, you understand, right? You'll take my side, won't you?
You shut up. No, I'm not on your side, young man, nor is anyone else.
Oh no.
Jacqueline, Jonah, I too have suffered the same pain you are as of now. My own husband was kicked out of his own company many years ago by yours truly because of disloyalty to me. I know how to handle situations like this now, and I strongly advise that we be thorough and relentless. Gareth thought that since I was a stay-at-home mom, there was no way I would divorce him. I would be too helpless in society without someone to provide for me. But when I told him that I had already started working from home in preparation for the divorce and was earning a decent income, he fell to his knees in complete defeat. With the help of the detective's report and the financial and moral support from Mrs. Michaels, Jonah and I received what we could from Gareth and Taylor, and the divorces were both finalized simultaneously. Gareth was then removed from his position as president by the board of directors, and his mother disowned him completely. Plagued with debt and embarrassment to his name, I'm sure that he is now working at his new place of employment with a metaphorical gun pointing at the back of his head. Taylor also got into a lot of debt because of the alimony payments to us, and even after the divorce, she couldn't stay at her parents' house because they turned her away for what she did. Now, she has to work every day to pay off her debts with a live-in job. After her traitorous son resigned, Mrs. Michaels has been more energetic than ever while also serving as the newest president of the company. Even now, several years after the divorce, she seems to be getting younger and younger every time I see her. Seeing her like that inspires me to do my best to live up to her name, and I hope to perhaps one day become someone as responsible as her.